All right, well, good morning, everybody. Out of respect for your time, we're gonna get started here. There'll probably be some other people who trickle in. So just to catch you up, we are having a discussion this morning. The three of us, Jake Weaver-Spidell, myself, Julie, and Keith, we went on a bus tour with a Thriving Together program. This was a civil rights bus tour through a number of sites. And we shared on some things last week, but we knew we wouldn't be able to fit everything into 1 hour. So today, we're going to wrap up some of the other things. We've tried to do this, Julianne put this together, which is very helpful as kind of a chronological history of the civil rights movement. And we tried to share about the places that we were at in that same order. So last week we got to about here. So today we're going to be talking about Albany, Georgia, Birmingham, and Selma, Montgomery, March. And then at the end, the National Museum of African American History. But we also have the King Center in Atlanta. So there'll be some things that we can share about there. And we're going to try and move through this as efficiently as possible. If you have questions, feel free to ask, but we will try to leave some question time at the end as well. So I think we'll just launch right into it if that works for you guys. So this is actually kind of a fun picture outside of the hotel in Albany, Georgia. This is a, not a monument, I don't know what you would call it. It's for Ray Charles, which I believe is from Albany, which would make sense why that's there. But it's this big spinning, like the whole thing spins and plays music. It's really fascinating, a unique, kind of out of the way because it was just across from our hotel. So I'm not sure the significance of the location, but it was a pretty neat thing. So starting here in Albany, Georgia, there was this fountain monument that explains some of the historical events that were happening. And what I liked about this as a reference to the civil rights movement is on this picture, you'll see on the bottom, it says national events, and it lists a bunch of those things down, but then it also includes local events to kind of say, this is what's happening broadly in our country in the civil rights movement, but here's some things that are happening right here with names and dates for people that you know in our community. So that was a really kind of neat, let's say memorial again, but it's kind of a display and a recognition of the importance of that city and the civil rights movement. I'll note, I'll kind of admit this, that I would like to think that I was relatively familiar with the civil rights movement with certain things that happened, but I knew next to nothing about Albany, Georgia. You know, there are certain places like Selma or Birmingham or Montgomery that pop into my mind when I think about the civil rights movement. But Albany, Georgia, for whatever reason, was not one that made it into my brain as an important and significant place. So it was neat to be here and to learn a little bit more about this. As these are right next to the fountain, and one of our leaders made the comment about witness trees and this idea that these trees were here before and during and throughout the civil rights movement, and to think about what they have seen, what they have been present for. It was a unique consideration.
Probably lynchings hung from those branches.
Well, I don't know about
in that area.
This specific, yeah, there certainly would have been, but I don't know that these, I don't know that there's any way of knowing that for sure. It's certainly possible. So the Georgia Civil Rights Trail, this is one of the markers and one of the monuments for, and these are the footprints that kind of ran up from a church that we're going to see in a second, all the way up to the town center. This was the location of a number of marches into town to show an opposition to some issues that were happening locally with Black businesses and segregation happening within the town. So you can see here, this is the church. You can see the footsteps coming down and leaving. As we saw last week, churches were the meeting place and were kind of the central hub for activism when it came to civil rights in these areas. They were the safe spaces that people could gather, prepare, get organized before they would go out on this march. This church here, in the front here, it says the Albany Civil Rights Movement started here. This is Shiloh Baptist Church. Interestingly, right across the street, like literally right across the street, is Old Mount Zion Baptist Church. I wish I would have gotten a picture that had both of them because they are right across the street from each other, not like kind of. They're both on the corner, both right there. And I mean, I had asked the question, you know, these are both Baptist churches. Like, why couldn't everyone just go to one church? But like we see in any town around, you know, there's lots of different churches that pop up. One of the explanations that was given to me, which I found interesting, was I was saying, well, what was different about these two churches? And Old Mount Zion Church was apparently the more affluent church. He said this is where local professionals, doctors and lawyers and things like that, this is where they would have attended church. Whereas Shiloh would have been more of the working class people of the town and not as affluent of a population within the church. And yet they were both Baptist churches right across the street. I found it interesting that this was the church where the movement started, that this was the hub for that organizational effort. And this congregation still exists today, but they moved off-site to a completely different place and have a new building. But they financed and built this entire Albany Civil Rights Institute. You can't really tell, but these two buildings are connected. You can see on the left side of the picture, it goes off to the side, and it connects to this. So this was a great museum for us to walk through. We couldn't take a ton of pictures, but it outlines some of the history.
When you say they funded it, you mean the small church?
I mean, no, I mean
Yeah,
Old Mount Zion
Oh,
Baptist
okay.
Church.
Okay.
They're the ones who financed the creation of this museum. And yet the other church was the more organizational hub. You see the footprints coming out of there. So that's, yeah.
Were the concretes of both churches white and black or white?
These were predominantly Black churches
Huh.
in both cases. There may have been some folks, but this is Rutha Mae Harris. She was one of the Freedom Singers. We had the opportunity to meet with them. There were a couple individuals from Albany who were a part of this Freedom Singers movement, where they would go around from place to place and share their vocal talents, but also raise money and awareness for the civil rights movement. And she is from Albany. There weren't, I think there were 4 folks who sang at the March on Washington in the a couple years later, as after this had started. And so it was really neat to meet her, and we actually had the opportunity to kind of sing along a little bit. So that was a fun experience for us. So that was a fun day for us. Yeah.
What impressed me about this was the way they taught the songs. They taught the songs. It was a call and response, very much, and it was you learn it line by line, and then you sang it all together.
So that was this was very early on in the trip. I think it was like the second day or so that we were in Albany. And so it was a good launching point for, again, for us to talk about the different ways in which churches were involved in the civil rights movement, how they were staging grounds for the movement. And there in Albany, like I mentioned, for myself personally, I didn't know a lot about that situation. And going through the museum, we got to kind of see the history, the local history, as well as some history for the civil rights movement. Later in our trip, but next chronologically, is Birmingham, Alabama. Did you want to come and share? I can advance some pictures for it.
Where is Albany in relation to Atlanta?
Oh,
Location-wise?
that's a good question.
Okay.
It's west. It's right before you get into Alabama,
Oh, okay.
right along the border of the two states.
It'd be closer to Birmingham than out than,
Atlanta,
yeah.
probably Midway. I mean,
Yeah, probably similar.
I think Albany was the furthest south we were.
Okay,
And then
Oh,
came back up. Yeah.
Oh,
so it's southwestern
Yeah.
Georgia.
I start with a picture of the church, and then I have some pictures of the park, and
Okay.
then back to the church. But I'll walk through some pictures here for whatever works for you.
okay. Well, I'd like to share this story because it was the most impressive to me, the story of what happened in Birmingham. Most impressive out of many impressive experiences that we had during that week. And I'm going to tell you the story. It happened in Birmingham, Alabama. Families were gathered on a Sunday morning to worship at the 16th Street Baptist Church, and that's the church you see here. Girls were excitedly getting ready for Youth Sunday. They had Youth Sunday once a month, and they were getting ready for that in the ladies' room, prepping themselves. And it was September 15th, 1963. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion. Everyone hit the floor. Silence. Then everyone started running. They were trying to get out of the church, trying to find their children, their brothers and sisters, their parents. Everything was pandemonium. But this was not the first bombing in Birmingham. In fact, in the previous 6 years, there had been 18 unsolved bombings in Birmingham. And gave the city the nickname Birmingham. In 1955, prior to this, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, some of you may know that name from the civil rights movement, he was a pastor of the Bethel Baptist Church, and he had begun a series of protests to attempt to integrate the public facilities in Birmingham so that Blacks could use the whites only dressing rooms in stores, eat at the lunch counters, use the elevators, water fountains, the toilets. How inconvenient that was for Black shoppers in these white-owned stores. During these years, prior to 1963, the KKK had bombed Shuttlesworth Church 3 times, including Christmas Day 1956, when his home right next door to the church was bombed while his family was in it. But still, the schools remained segregated. The city parks had been closed to everyone, white and Black, to avoid integration. Libraries were integrated, but only after all the chairs had been removed. Yet, Reverend Shuttlesworth did not give up. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference had formally incorporated in 1956 with Martin Luther King Jr. as in leadership, and Shuttlesworth was the secretary of that organization. And finally, in 1963, Shuttlesworth called on King and Ralph Abernathy to come and lead a protest on Good Friday. Now, prior to that protest, King met with volunteers in a packed 16th Street Baptist Church. inspiring them, teaching them nonviolent responses to the white supremacists that they would encounter, teaching them songs of the movement, like we heard just now, to remind them of the protests, biblical foundations, and the strength that they would find together. So on April 3rd, 1963, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference staged some sit-ins. On April 6th, 45 protesters marching from the 16th Street Baptist Church to the City Hall were arrested. On April 7th, Palm Sunday, there were more arrests. On April 12th, Martin Luther King Jr. and other Southern Christian Leadership Conference leaders were arrested. And that's when King wrote his letter from the Birmingham jail. While he was incarcerated there in solitary confinement. And he was writing the letter in response to white ministers in Birmingham who called him a troublemaker. And he was writing the moral justification of the movement, arguing that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. He was released from jail on April 20th. But the arrests had depleted the number of volunteers that were available to do protests. Adults needed to be at work to support their families. So a reluctant king agreed to lead a children's crusade. Children were taught how to respond when confronted with white supremacists. On May 2nd, the children were alerted to a previously secret date, D-Day, by a local DJ on the radio who broadcast it in code that this was the day. 50 teenagers left school that day, marching towards City Hall, singing "We Shall Overcome." They were arrested and put in police vans. So another group of children left school to march. And again, and again, and again, in waves, these groups of children would leave school to join the march. 3 hours later, 959 children, ages 6 to 18, had been arrested and put in jail. The next day, 1,000 more children stayed out of school and gathered across the way from the church in Laura Ingram Park. They were met there by Bull Connor with fire hoses strong enough to break their bones, and rolled them down the street. There were also canine forces that attacked protesters who were trying to get to safety inside the church. By now, the whole country and around the world were watching. So President Kennedy intervened, brokered a truce. The business community, fearing damage to their downtown stores, had agreed to integrate lunch counters and hire more blacks. These events became the impetus for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It was an important win for King and the movement, but the KKK wasn't finished yet. On September 15th, the 16th Street Baptist Church was bombed. 4 girls, 14 years old, who had been primping for Youth Sunday, were killed. Another girl, Carolyn McKinstry, was just feet from the bombing. She had just been with these girls. She had just left. Our Thriving Together cohort heard Carolyn tell her story. That Sunday afternoon in 1963, she waited at home with her parents for word of what had happened. They had been in church and now they were at home. And she learned that her best friend was one of the girls who had been killed. All the children went back to school the next day. No one talked about the bombing at school, at home, or at church. It was like it had never happened. No one's trauma was ever addressed by any kind of counseling. So Carolyn grew up, went to Fisk university, an HBCU college in Tennessee, got married, had a family, but in repressing the trauma, she also became an alcoholic. She was eventually able to recover from her alcoholism and describes, I want to read you in her own words, what happened in her life. One day I answered a call from God, go back into the world and try to make a difference in the area of reconciliation and forgiveness. So I have spent the better part of my last 30 years, traveling as an ambassador of goodwill, reconciliation, and forgiveness. I believe that all humans share a lot of common ground. I believe, like Gandhi, that all people are brothers and sisters, and that if we would lead, we must first serve. I believe, like Dr. King, that we must choose community over chaos if we are to build a world where all are welcome, where all can enter, and all can become everything they have been created to be. I also believe, like Isaiah, in reconciliation. And I believe that one day the lamb will lie down with the lion, and neither will do harm. And both will be filled with the goodness of God. God allowed me to live on September 15th, that I might serve as a living witness to God's power. Not only to the power of God's glory, but to the power that God has for reconciliation and forgiveness. She wrote her story in the book While the World Watched, and this copy of this is in our social justice library, as well as another person another woman who also told her story to us that evening, whose sister was one of the girls that was killed. This woman writing the book was born a year after this. So she has a story to tell about what happened after that, and how it has affected her life.
What's that book?
That book is Dear Denise. It's written as letters to her sister that she never knew. So we visited the church, the sanctuary, sat in the sanctuary where that nonviolence had been taught, and listened to a guide tell a story. We saw a film there. This is the sanctuary of the church we were sitting
That's the 16th Street.
at the 16th Street Baptist Church. And we also visited the Laura Ingram Park across from the church, that has memorials and sculptures remembering this time. And we saw a stained glass window in the church. Oh, this is in the park.
I don't know if you wanted to say anything about this.
This is a memorial to the 4 girls. These are the 4 girls that were killed. And you see the one girl with doves. There's a stained glass window in the church that was actually sent by children who collected their pennies in Wales and sent it to the church. Well, sent arranged for a stained glass window
In the country of Wales.
from the country of Wales. So this was a few years later till this was actually done. The figure is a black Jesus. And in the window, he's depicted as pushing away hatred and injustice with his right hand and offering his left hand in forgiveness. It's the courage, persistence in the face of danger, the commitment to nonviolent protest, the faith not only of the leaders, but of the ordinary people that participate in these marches, of the children who would not give up. And that motivates me. Share their stories. To apply them to our time here in our community in Elizabeth County. Make it a place where all people are welcome as full members of society. I hope you will join us in that effort.
Well, think about that. Because when we met with Carolyn McKinstry, she shared, I don't think we have an image of it in the slideshow of like, there's a form you filled out if you wanted to be a volunteer in the movement. And you had to sign and agree to certain terms in this form. And to me, that was very moving to see like how rooted in faith it was. So I just wanted to read a couple of things you signed and agreed to. I won't read the entire document. There's only a couple I wanted to read. But it was for the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights pledge. This is what the pledge was. I hereby pledge myself, my person, and my body to the nonviolent movement. Therefore, I will keep following Ten Commandments. And some of them just struck me as like how rooted in faith and how much devotion it took just to be part of this movement, to sign up and do it. The first one is 1, meditate daily on the teachings and life of Jesus. 2, remember always that the nonviolent movement in Birmingham seeks justice and reconciliation, not victory. 3, walk and talk in the name of love, for God is love. 4, pray daily to be used by God in order that all men might be free. Skip to 8, refrain from violence of fist, tongue, or heart. Like it's wholly encompassing. It's not just your physical actions and how you respond to this, but it's how you are inwardly responding, even if people can't see it, because that kind of impacts everything. 9, strive to be in good spiritual and bodily health. And I was so struck to see how rooted in faith the movement was and has been. And we can touch on this a little bit later when we get to the MLK Center. But it was very encouraging to me and like bolstered my faith, and encouraging me personally to want to develop my faith in ways that I could kind of embody those principles as well. I just wanted to add that on there since we talked about that.
I'm glad you did, thank you.
I don't know, how do we want to do
Selma. So, you see this quote here by a woman named Joanne Bland. We got to meet with her. I don't think I have any pictures of her, but this mural is on the site that they're trying to raise funds for, to kind of create a social justice learning facility for youth in the area. So this is in Selma. We were actually in Montgomery first, and then we went to Selma. Along the way, we'll get to the Loudon Center, but this was the staging point in Selma for a walk to the Capitol in Montgomery. And there were obviously lots of issues within the city of Selma, issues of race as there were throughout the South. One of the things that I think was quite apparent to us and to everyone on the bus trip is that when we're in Selma today, the city itself is filled with blight. There's lots of areas within the city that are underdeveloped, and so there's a real effort to bring rejuvenation back into the city that has such an important relationship to the civil rights movement. So again, there were these murals here.
What was that quote that I couldn't read?
Yeah, it says one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. And that's from MLK's letter to Birmingham. Not too far away from that location, again, was a church that operated as the staging area for this movement in Selma. And this monument memorial lists the names of individuals who were involved in the civil rights movement, but particularly involved in the march from Selma to Montgomery.
The quote I was referring to was the little one before that picture, the lady's quote.
Oh,
I could read you.
yeah. If your piece is missing, the picture isn't complete. Why? Because you're the most important piece.
This was really aimed at children.
Right.
It was a playground that you
Right.
developed.
So again, this is
What strikes me about that other quote is that we are now living in a generation, I think, when white supremacy has adopted the civil rights slogan, except that their unjust laws are the ones that they think prohibit whites from being in supremacy. And they have a moral responsibility. I think they've taken on that same fervor in
Yes.
response.
In this picture, quick, the little girl with her hand up with the 11 by 13 equals jail. That's an honor Joanne Bland, who we met with,
Oh, yeah.
because by the time she was 11, she went to jail 13 times
Wow.
for her work in this movement.
Oh,
So she's an icon and a leader there to this day, still trying to fight for justice and get Selma back to where it had been prospering prior to the civil rights movement, and how it's been kind of ignored and forgotten since then, as the world's eye has moved on.
Yeah, and it says a lot that they're willing to arrest an 11-year-old 13 times.
Yeah.
So again, this is,
About her tenacity.
yeah, it does.
Oh, yeah.
And their willingness to be stubborn.
Yeah.
So this is a staging ground for the church. There's a picture of Martin Luther King out front. This is probably half a mile from where the maybe a mile, where the bridge crosses out of Selma, which has kind of become an iconic spot. We also took this tour, and again, we'll see this in Montgomery too, but there's this juxtaposition of trying to, in addition to these civil rights landmarks that are everywhere, there's also a lot of Confederacy. This was a cemetery that was largely a Confederate cemetery, and we went in there to see, because it's right in the heart of Selma. This was an interesting thing. Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was kind of a founder or a leader of the KKK, has this tribute to him. And this statue that you saw on the previous slide was actually, I think, more prominently located downtown, but then moved here. And they make a reference to that in this plaque that says, bowing to the protests of few intolerant self-styled activists and under pressure from Selma's first Black mayor, the Selma City Council voted 5-4 on the 26th of February, 2001 to move the monument to its current location. So you can just feel the biting.
Attention.
Yeah, this plaque was donated by the Order of the Southern Cross.
As the Daughters of the Confederacy that currently upkeep
Yeah, that
that
cemetery.
cemetery to this day, placing flags and making it nice.
So this is the kind of iconic Edmund Pettus Bridge. We're looking from Selma, we're on the Selma side, and if there was, starting off in this march, there was an attempt to cross this bridge, but when they got to the other side, they were met with police brutality. And John Lewis, amongst others, famous for confronting and enduring that violence, they would return back. At a later date, MLK would march across the bridge with them and again face that resistance, but this time they decided to turn back. And there was some criticism of that, but also they just weren't going to endure that level of attack and violence again. But eventually, and waited to, they could legally do it, to let the courts process some things, so that basically it became, the police had to not confront them, but had to walk beside them and kind of like provide protection for them on this march. So we had the opportunity to walk across this bridge.
I mean, I say the bridge crosses the Alabama River, and the Alabama River empties into the Gulf of Mexico. And this is about as far north as ships could go on that river. And they would bring slaves in. So it was a major
Yeah, Selma was a hub.
junction for that.
Did the police stop them because they weren't allowed? Was there a law, or they just
I
thought
think
they were trouble?
well, so it was obviously rooted in racism, but I think their legal position was like, maybe you don't have the right paperwork or permit that we wouldn't even allow you to fill out in the first place. Like you need a permit, but there's no form to get one.
To get into Montgomery.
Yeah, but it was another 30 some miles.
Oh.
So this was just right on the outskirts of Selma, so stop that, march at its
I
start.
mean, that's part of what's crazy is that nobody understands why.
So does the river, is the dividing line between Georgia and Alabama? No,
No, this is all within
All
Alabama.
Alabama.
all Alabama.
Yeah, and the second attempt, like the first attempt was Bloody Sunday where they were met with violence. The second attempt was 2 days later. There had been an injunction in the courts that they were not legally permitted to go, but they decided to march anyway. They were met at the bridge. They had a moment of prayer and they decided, Martin Luther King and others decided to turn it around despite resistance. And it was several weeks later that they marched the third time with the, legally.
How far was that? Like a half mile? across the
I-
bridge?
It was pretty
It's
short.
really, you see these pictures
Yeah.
of the films of what was happening. It seems like a huge place. And it was just a little place. You can see the shoulder there. It's just two people walking. There you go. That's what we did.
So it wasn't even a big bridge,
No.
like more like a quarter or an eighth of a mile.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very
Very short.
kind of short span. What was moving to me being on this bridge is one, just it's so historic. And we took this walk in silence, being contemplative. And while we walked, what I heard, obviously there are some cars, but all around the river, like in the trees, there are cicadas. And the
Mhm.
cicadas just like
Mhm.
blaring out and they're loud and like screaming. And to me, it was like, I don't know, they were in a way like the witness trees,
Mhm.
nature in the surrounding area was witness to the atrocity and still telling that story, almost like letting you in a way experience the trauma that happened there and the violence that occurred.
Do either of you remember who Edmund Pettus was? He was the white supremacist.
He was a leader of the, like a grand wizard of the.
Yeah.
KKK. And there have been multiple efforts to change the name of that bridge, like the Freedom Bridge or something like
The
that.
John Lewis Bridge.
John Lewis, they've all been shut down in the legislature statements.
Alabama State.
So, this is the loudness, there was this center kind of halfway between, on the right, you can see Selma over here, and then Montgomery over here. And this was the long, march to Montgomery. And there were a couple campsites along the way, and there were a couple sections that were so dangerous that they only had a few people actually do it. And then the rest of the group would meet up at different places. And so this was a march that took place. You can see day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and this is a center that's kind of a learning center
What
that
year
that
was
was on the
that?
way. This would have been in 60,
65.
was it 5? Yeah, 65.
That was on Bloody Sunday.
And on that march, yeah, they averaged about 10 miles a day and they were camps. They had to camp. There weren't any lodgings. And to this day, there are still no hotels, motels, nothing between Selma and Montgomery. So the interpretive center here is built on one of the sites where they had camp.
Mhm.
How many miles was that total march?
30.
30 something, I think. And there was, I don't have pictures of it, but there was a memorial along the way. You can see it here. Viola Luiso, she was murdered.
And there was a tent camp there, and that tent camp was for people who had lost their homes, I think. And I can't remember now, I'm sorry.
It's there now.
That was there then. But these people that were already homeless were providing a place for the marchers.
So this is Montgomery. We saw some pictures of this last Sunday. This is the same road that Dexter Avenue, Martin Luther King's church in Montgomery was located. And again, these iconic footprints that show kind of where as a representation of the march that came up this long street. You can look down this boulevard. This picture is taken from the Capitol steps looking down. This march would have come up. But again, we see this juxtaposition of there's some Confederate monuments along the way. There's this Jefferson Davis statue that's right here. This star marks the spot where Jefferson Davis was sworn in as the president of the Confederacy, which is right there. And this door is famous for where George Wallace stood and said, you know, segregation today, what segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, whatever statement he made. But I think this is an interesting picture, and I took it because he was wrong.
Somebody shot him.
Because I felt like it was a good reminder that how adamant and sure he was, and how everyone or all of the white people around him were confident that segregation was going to last forever. And just it's a reminder to me that things change.
He changed more than once.
Yeah.
I remember reading that before he was known as a segregationist, he lost an election running as a moderate. And so adjusted his stance
Right,
in future elections.
right.
And he also does, I don't remember who shot him, but he spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair. I doubt if it was a white supremacist, but however it happened, justice is served maybe once in a while.
We stopped on the way out I'm not going to say much about it. It was a neat stop, but it was the National Museum of African American Music in Nashville. It was a nice place for us to walk around and see some things. I wanted to end with the King Center. This was actually not the first stop, but when we were down south, this was the first place that we went to in Atlanta. So I'm going to share some pictures and some things. Jake, if you have anything you wanted to add as well. This is inside one of the areas of the center. It makes reference to how influential Gandhi was to the nonviolence of Martin Luther King Jr.'s understanding of nonviolence and the influence that he saw in Mahatma Gandhi in India. This is the actual memorial and resting place for Martin Luther King and his wife, Greta. We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
The water is rolling down the steps memorial.
I missed the first word.
Women are the soul of the nation, is to be saved that you must become. This is the Nobel Peace Prize that Martin Luther King Jr. was awarded. This was the house that he grew up in, which was under construction. We weren't able to actually see it except to take that picture. This is an image of Ebenezer Baptist Church.
When you say under construction, it's a museum.
Under renovation, I think,
Okay.
trying to
Yeah.
update it. Right next to it, there was another house that kind of had a little gift shop in it. It's kind of a complex. If anyone's been there, it's kind of spread out.
It's over like a couple of blocks.
Yeah.
You have the original Ebenezer Church, and then
Right.
the current one that is pastored by Raphael Warnock Jr. That
Senator.
Senate, yes, that we were not able to go in because it is a live active congregation. We can't visit that. Or, well, we also can go in this.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of wrap up by kind of mentioning that, as Jake was alluding to, that these are the core principles to Kingian nonviolence. And I wanted to have them listed here because it did represent kind of a backbone to the movement. And the idea that this is so deeply rooted within our faith. Also, as a plug for the Kingian Nonviolence training that is going to be happening here in about a month. The first weekend of October, we have a 16-hour training that's here. And we're really looking to this as an opportunity for this congregation, but also the community. So I would ask you to be thinking about that. And particularly if you know of individuals who would be interested in participating in that training outside of this church within the community, we would love to have as many people here as possible. And so I know that a number of you are connected with individuals. If there are people that you think would benefit from this, I would ask for your help in helping to spread the word. Thus concludes the images from our trip together. I don't know if you guys have other things, anything you wanted to add or say about the King Center or about the trip in general, and we'll also open up for some questions. We have about 10 minutes.
Do I remember correctly that King spent time with Mahatma Gandhi in India?
Yes, I think we did.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I know he was certainly influenced by
Yeah,
him. I'm not
but I
sure
think they
what
spent
that
time
overlap looked
together.
like. I'm not entirely sure.
Was, at the end of your trip, was there kind of a call to action or, for the group that you were with?
Well, this Thriving Together group is continuing to meet. We have been meeting for a year. We'll continue to meet for almost another year. And so that is kind of an ongoing thing. We were pretty intentional about taking some times to debrief and to have conversations amongst ourselves about what this looks like when we go back home. So I think those conversations definitely took place, but there is still more to do.
Actually, on September 14th, those of us who went on the trip are meeting together for on Saturday morning to debrief. And
How
at
many
the,
were on the trip?
there were at least 40 people on the bus. 4 of them were fellows from Messiah University connected with this. Some were professors. But if everybody, there are 3 representatives from each of 12 churches. That would have made 36. I know of at least 2 people who could not come. So there are 40 plus people probably. But what will happen at the end of this whole 2-year period, which will be next spring, is that we will be helped to write, each church will be helped to write a grant for their church or whatever we want concerning this from the Lilly Foundation. This whole program is a Lilly Foundation financed by the Lilly Foundation. And we would be able to get $1,000 grant for our church to use in some way in promoting racial justice. If you have any ideas, let us know.
Lilly, the pharmaceutical company.
Yeah, they provided the funding for the Thriving Together program that Messiah has. Yeah.
And for this trip, we did not pay a penny for this trip.
Eli Lilly, that foundation, they have a vested interest in supporting a lot of different ministry opportunities, which was surprising to me. But I know that the Church of the Brethren has had a number of different grant programs. 20 years ago, I went on a trip over to Germany as a Brethren Heritage Tour that was financed by the Lilly Foundation.
When Greg Lazakovitz took his Sabbath rest and went back to Brazil, that was sponsored by a Lilly Foundation grant.
The general board, which is now Mission Ministry Board, has made this a priority for the last 25 years to make sure that board members could go on a journey. I'm wondering if it was similar in any way to what you did. The journey was funded, was organized by the Covenant Church denomination, and it required that every person on this journey be matched up racially.
Mhm.
black and white. And that they spend some intense times in conversation. And those members of the board came back and talked about beginning to recognize things within themselves that they had not known about themselves before until this confrontational kind of conversation done in the spirit of Christian love, but nevertheless forthright. I wondered if your journey included any of that kind of experience.
There were a couple intentional moments of conversation that were kind of like organized, but there was no mandatory requirement, and we were not partnered with anyone of a different background or race. Organic moments occurred quite frequently because we spent an entire day on a bus with everybody and would have all our meals together, and it just occurred naturally. There wasn't a requirement to do anything like we weren't partnered with anybody, no.
Yeah.
But there was, in particular, one evening we spent, the three of us with three Black people from another congregation in Harrisburg. And there was some deep reflections during that conversation. And one person said, I told us a story of his family's experience. He said, I've never shared this with anybody before. So, yes, there were those times.
And really quickly, just because it was the most meaningful part of the trip for me, the MLK Center itself felt like church to me. Walking around, reading the 6 principles of Kinging Nonviolence, which is another plug for an upcoming sermon series. I'm very excited for that. And again, it just rooted the movement and nonviolence in faith in a very real way for me. So if you're unfamiliar, you'll become familiar over the next couple weeks when this happens. I encourage everyone to read it. I had one quote I wanted to share that was at the MLK Center right next to the Kinging Nonviolent Principles. And it said, people who think nonviolence is easy don't realize that it's a spiritual discipline that requires a great deal of strength, growth, and purging of the self so that one can overcome almost any obstacle for the good of all without being concerned about one's own welfare. And the idea of it being a spiritual discipline. And nonviolence here, they don't talk about just physical actions. It's again of the heart, like nonviolence of the heart, how we think, how we feel, how we are in this world. And it was a challenge to me and something to like orient my life around all 6 principles, but this was a good summation of that. So I just want to share that. I encourage everyone to look into these principles and come to the sermon series. Again, if there's any other questions, like we have a couple minutes.
Just in response to your question too, the church, I said there were 3 others from the church in Harrisburg. It's Tabernacle Baptist Church. We had in last winter, I guess, we were given Starbucks gift cards, and encouraged to meet with another church just to talk, just sit down at Starbucks and talk. And this was one of the groups that we talked with. And 5 of us went to visit their church 2 weeks ago and worship with them. And one of them has come here. He had come a couple weeks before that to visit us. Their brainstorming plans of how the 2 congregations can interact more and get to know each other more. So I look forward to that.
Do a grant together.
Pardon?
Do a
Do a grant
grant together.
together? Could be.
One thing that I just wanted to share, how many of you remember the Promise Keepers movement?
Yes.
Okay, and one thing that was said there that always stayed with me is the most segregated 3 hours in our Christian nation is Sunday morning. And I would love to understand how we could desegregate our churches with other churches. I came from a church near King of Prussia that was the most multi-ethnic church I've ever been part of. And it was just a beautiful experience of mixing with Puerto Ricans and Blacks. It was more people of color than white. And to all worship together, have small groups together was great. I miss it. I miss it.
Yeah, one thing that I used to work for Christian Churches United, which is Dolphin and Cumberland County, Tri-County. But we, after, well, even before the George Floyd thing, started having meetings between what the West Shore and the East Shore. The shore and the West Shore. The West Shore was white, and they had their sundown towns. And the East Shore was in Harrisburg predominantly African American and such. And it was, the idea was to get together and for people to listen to the Black experience. Because everybody hears the white experience. That's out there all the time. That's what we hear, but we don't sit and listen and not make comment while people of color talk about their experience. We always want to take an exception. Well, but no. You listen and you don't say anything and you actually try to understand and get in their shoes and their experiences. Going shopping, walking down the street and everything. And they had a number of those sessions, you know, before the pandemic, but then afterward it was virtual. And then some back again, but I think that's still ongoing. So if you want to experience some of that, even though we're not technically in Dauphin County, we're only 2 miles from it. And you can maybe be a part of that.
The Thriving Together program is for churches in the greater Harrisburg area. This is the second cohort. So the first cohort, we had applied for that. We were not accepted in that. I think we were too far geographically out of that space, but now they kind of extended that. But it's always East Shore, West Shore churches that are involved. It's a very intentional, just in the way you were describing, Damon. And so there are churches now from Carlisle, Hillsburg, from Cumberland County, as well as E-Town over here.
Who else in your task force here in our congregation?
Well, 3 of us
Three
are
of
part
us.
of that.
The 3 of you.
There are 3 from each congregation in this cohort, and the 3 of us.
For that particular thing, but I thought we had a broader.
Oh,
racial
yes.
justice
Well, the racial
task force.
justice.
Racial justice group,
Yeah, and how many do you have?
about 10 people.
About 10?
I would run
That's Gina Strauss and Marilyn Mustin and Jerry Bear. Jerry's doing a lot, Marty,
Baker.
Paul Brubaker, Pat. Jerry's doing a lot of historical research for us in terms of Elizabethtown and looking at things from the archives from the Elizabethtown College because of the connection early on to see what do people know about, what were people talking about, what were people doing at that point, and have found things that sermon notes from Schlosser, one thing, and with comments about it. So we're trying to do that as well.
There will be continued opportunities as our work continues with Thriving Together for us to share with what's going on and for this congregation to continue to be engaged in issues of racial justice. But those upcoming things would be the Kingian Nonviolence, but also to check out the resources that we've provided that are out in the Racial Justice Library.
Right.
And we're always available for questions and conversations and anyone else. All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.